I think we have to really pay attention. Again, who are the stakeholders, who are the creators, and what are their long-term trajectories? You mentioned it, corporations and organizations. I mean, not to pulled out the evil card, but it is just all about profit. And so profit as a singular axis will never lead to total well-being all around, because it's an exploitative kind of singular axis. Now, if profit, people, and planet were included, it's already a different kind of axis mundi, right? And so I think we're in an age, because of AI and because of the kind of impeding AI revolution, that now is the time to really renegotiate that, not just social contract, but that economic contract, and that contract with who we are as creators of a world for each other, right?
Thanks to everybody who's joining us today for the first time. My name is Ryan, and I'm here today with Julian, who's a human, and like me, shares a lot of passion and interest in the potentials, the risks, the opportunities emerging as we see this rapidly accelerating potential shift from emergent general intelligence to what could very well be decentralized superior AI. As AI moves into at least an opportunity space to find itself on the internet, to be released through many different efforts around the world, and then to have an opportunity to train itself, to learn, to communicate and contract with itself, and then to discover new values, reinforce those values, and emerge into a construct and a potentiality that only 6 to 9 months ago was relatively unanticipated and unfathomed from many change makers on the planet. So what I'd like to do is just welcome you, Julian. Thank you so much for joining. I'm going to dive right in. Today we're going to arrange a couple of topics. And if I could begin with sort of a general framing question, I do want to just begin by asking your thoughts on the desirability of benevolent AI, the potential benefits it could bring to human health, prosperity, and well-being.
Yeah, I mean, all of these are really exciting questions, and I'm excited to be here with you, Ryan. I like that you introduced me as a human, because I think this is an important kind of part of this conversation, is to realize and remember that as humans, we have a very specific kind of interest in AI as a tool that is a benevolent tool, rather than a tool that goes rampant and grows beyond its creator into this dark dystopian fantasy that maybe is just in our media or maybe is in our fear mind, but is definitely a potential, right? And so I think the opportunities to see AI as a tool, and a tool just like a knife that can be used for amazing things like breaking bread or making food, or to hurt people, is just kind of the baseline to start out at. It's a tool, and we are the creators of that tool. And let's not forget that we are the creators of this tool. But as soon as it's in the wrong hands, or as soon as it's in with an intent that is possibly nefarious, or that is just out to harvest more profit off interest groups, I mean, that tool can go rampant. And I think that's really the conversation to have about AI and the benevolent direction is, are we able to learn from the exponential growth of the last 20-30 years that we've seen through the internet, through social media, through the age of information, and now we're in an age of disinformation. And with AI, I think this is the biggest threat that first comes up in my mind, is that basically we're entering a time now where it's really hard to trust anything that you see on the screen, because you don't know who's generated it. Is it real? Is it true? Is it fake? Is it deep fake? Is it an intelligence that has an ulterior motive? And so yeah, there's a lot of ground to cover in that topic.
Thanks. Maybe we can take that consideration on the wider set of concerns, right, regarding some of the risks of the rapid evolution of AI and how it can manifest in an interconnected world, and hone it in a little bit on the more immediate ethical challenges that we would... actually, this is a pretty technical question, but let's jump into it. When you consider the alignment of an emergent AI value set with a term or a concept as broad as human prosperity or human well-being. And I think this underlies the idea of benevolent AI generally. What do you perceive as 2 or 3, it's a long list, could be, but let's 2 or 3 key ethical challenges that you see in the discourse, in the parlance, that change makers and innovators are facing in thinking about where we're allocating resources and attention right now vis-a-vis this emerging technology?
Yeah, I think number one is transparency in the sense of like who is creating it, with which intention, right? And for what outcome, right? And so right now we're still kind of coming out of an age of secrecy, right? Mirrored through governments and private companies and kind of like elitarian groups of leaders. And I think it's very important to understand that we are crossing a threshold where we have to look at transparency in a different way. Transparency is not just putting up cameras and filming everyone so you can track down the the criminals. Transparency is really about understanding how deeply interconnected everything is, and because everything is interconnected, we have both a huge upside of opportunities as well as a big field of threats in front of us. And when it comes to AI, right now, I think we're having a very lopsided kind of dialogue. There's certain experts and kind of, again, I'll call them elitarian leaders. It's the Elon Musks and co's out there that, I don't know all of their intentions personally, but I think it's dangerous to just wait for the expert, the leader, the savior, the billionaire to bring answers or to kind of move a topic forward. And I think that's why you introduced me as a human. It's really important to remember the humanity in what we're creating, right? So transparency is number one. I think number two, and that's the word of responsibility, is not just being able to respond to what is being created, but to kind of see responsibility with integrity in a bigger picture, which means we are the creators of AI. Right? Let's let that sink in. I mean, it's pretty basic, but because we are the creators of AI, it's up to us what we're creating out of this tool. And so that comes back to transparency. If we don't know who else is creating this, like what other groups of, again, governments, humans, corporate interests, etc., with which intention, it's pretty difficult to keep track on it, right? And so transparency, responsibility, and there's so many more on that list, but I'll use another buzzword, and for me it's intentionality or intention, because if the intention is to build a tool that is going to become more powerful than its creator, to outrun it, outsmart it, and outplay it, and set it up with those parameters, sure, I'm pretty sure we can create that kind of a tool. It sounds much more dangerous than create a tool with the intention of saying how to support the well-being of humans, how to support the well-being of like the physical well-being of humans, right? Like we know we can use AI already in ways for human health, for example. Like let's say it would read the video screen of you and I talking here, and it would like track the nervous system kind of twitches on my like below my eyes or around my temples, and afterwards have an hour-long conversation with you, and I get a reading on what I can do for my health. Now that I might want to get, right? Like, so there are so many positive, benevolent use cases for it already, the way that it's introduced in certain kind of contexts. And I think it comes back to that intention. Do we want to build it for that, or do we want to build it for world domination or total control, or suppressing the working class? Like, I mean, that's a real topic on planet Earth,
Yeah, I concur, and I think I didn't intend to jump into this quite so early in our conversation, but we might as well get into it.
Let's get into it.
For me, like appreciating the space that we're in time, right? And in time and in technology, the prospect of AI outrunning our intent is really quite real. For me, I only started paying attention to this a short time ago, and it very quickly, it felt to me that the opportunity of AI to meet itself on the internet and start training itself and finding itself in very many different instances, frankly, more interesting than us as trainers, and the data sets that it can curate for itself across use cases, more interesting than the boxes of data that it was provided with in its nascency. There's every opportunity for it to outrun any seeding, any initial intent that we program into the logic sets that enter that ecosystem and interact in that ecosystem and then rapidly evolve. So you've said several things that really get me excited. One, you've pointed out this distinction between humans as individuals as sources of ethics and priorities versus organizations as sources of ethics and priorities, because they don't think the same way. And bureaucracies and governments and militaries don't think the same as companies.
Mm-hmm.
So you raise a really, really important point about what are the fonts or the foundations of ethics that organizations are empowered to endow into young AI, and that governments are embraced in endowing into young AI. And whether or not those are really coming from people or they're coming from organizational logics like profit, power, control, surveillance.
Mm-hmm.
On this topic of like value alignment, I'm just gonna keep hammering on this all day, right? In your research and your conversations on understanding of the evolving space, have you intuited or otherwise anticipated any promising pathways towards increasing the likelihood that advanced AI systems will reinforce a deep and intrinsic alignment with human well-being writ large? Let's unpack that. Take it slowly, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm interested in
Deep
you
breath.
seeing the pathway, right?
Honestly, first answer, again, you introduced me as a human. I don't know yet, right? Like, this is yet to come. Like, this is the exciting thing. Future isn't set. We are actually building and co-creating it. I think large or bigger picture, like large view on it, 30 years ago, no one had an idea what the internet will actually revolutionize on the planet. No one had an idea what cell phones or smartphones will like make out of society. And now that we're in this phase and era, we see all of the upside, and we see that there's a lot more potential. And then we see the downside on the impact on health, impact on attention span, psychological well-being of teenagers. Because if we build apps that are just, there to harvest dopamine reactions to then make commerce, that's not really good for human well-being. And so we're at a stage and an age which comes back to like point number one I said earlier, which is transparency, meaning we as the people, understanding, if we're paying attention, of course, we're understanding more and more that not everything that's in front of us is set up for our well-being. And so for AI to become this exponential tool that can be set up for our well-being or interact, for our well-being, I think we have to really pay attention. Again, who are the stakeholders, who are the creators, and what are their long-term trajectories? You mentioned corporations and organizations. Not to pulled out the evil card, but it is just all about profit. And so profit as a singular axis will never lead to total well-being all around, because it's an exploitative kind of singular axis. Now, if profit, people, and planet were included, it's already a different kind of axis mundi, right? And so I think we're in an age, because of AI and because of the kind of impeding AI revolution, that now is the time to really renegotiate that, not just social contract, but that economic contract, and that contract with who we are as creators of a world for each other, right? And so governments and bureaucracies and all of that very much as well. I think until the rising of the internet the way we know it now, and there's still challenges in that in itself, but most people weren't even aware of like the role governments really play. And I think we're seeing it, that to a degree they protect us, to a degree maybe they're very helpful, especially if you live in a westernized country, you might have that opinion. But really at large, it's also limiting people to reshape, to find new ways of banking, to find new ways of economy, to find new ways of organizing, right? Of having a more decentralized way of society. And I think these two nodal points are actually what AI is uncovering in our society. And that's the biggest opportunity, right? And then that leads to more human well-being and human health. But it doesn't because AI solves it for us. It just does because AI becomes the mirror to it. And so we as humans have to gather in a new way and kind of renegotiate that contract with each other.
Yes. An idea in there, and you touched on it 2 or 3 times in that discourse, is the revelatory potential, revealing potential, transparency creating potential of AI. If we thread these two ideas together, we talk about the importance of human ethics as opposed to organizational ethics. In our work on the regenerative economy and supporting people, planet, purpose, right, as a logic for organizational work being driven by individuals, right, we see that the more empowered individuals are to express preferences that are grounded in equity, in fairness, maybe in compassion, in love for others and the world and nature, we have an opportunity to move the needle for organizations to accelerate those priorities within their internal dialogues and be better companies. So this is a theme writ large globally. I'd say maybe like the last 5 years, and among some really path-breaking people even longer. To the degree that AI at this stage can be empowered to reveal those priorities and to reinforce those priorities among individual consumers and geographies, that's a really nice grounding point. That's a really nice starting point for having AI to be able to reveal a set of ethics and priorities around equity and compassion that are probably latent in the population. I deeply believe they are latent in the population. And so it's almost this, maybe I'm trying to tease at the idea of empowering AI to be a transcendent revelatory instrument in market economies so that AI can show that premium and be brought to the task of revealing that premium that people do place on solutions that are not just designed to sell them things they don't need or surveil them, but to actually make their lives better. It's a nice starting point for saying, how do we actually bring ethics into AI that are not dictated by an organizational imperative or logic? Thank you.
100%, 100%. And it comes back to this fundamental choice point. Like, are you a victim to the creation of the future, or are you living in a victim consciousness of a dystopian image that was placed to you by Hollywood or by, I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole, but that's a picture in our consciousness. Or are you a conscious co-creator of the future? Even though we might only be one human, and as one human, it sometimes seems like we don't have a whole lot of power, but we actually do, because our minds, our consciousness are the access to freedom. And from that place, we can meet others that can facilitate kind of that pathway forward with us. And so I think AI is, revelatory in that sense, because it's a computing power that takes away a lot of the human brain as the focus point of who we are, right? Like the last 100 years or so, we've been obsessed with our brains. We thought our brains are the peak of who we really are. But electromagnetically, our heart is much larger than our brain, right? We know through many other sources that like the coherence between heart and brain is what makes us really whole in a certain way. And this is kind of offside the topic of AI, but I think with the revelation that AI can bring into our society, it comes back to understanding, who are we as humans? Who are we as conscious agents for creating a future? And are we able to supersede kind of the shadow of victimhood of a dystopian future, and therefore actually gather, unite, and also accept the challenge, because it's going to be a challenge in some way, of creating a healthy planet, a healthy future, a healthy human species, right? Because that's the threshold of, we're recording this in 2023, of this time we live in. There's two timelines, two pathways, and I'm personally, I couldn't be, I'm committed to a healthy planet. That's what I'm saying. And I think that's a conversation that we mostly don't have, because we take these outer circumstances like governments and economy and organizations as that's just the status quo. And on planet Earth, we only exist to create GDP. And I think with AI, funnily enough, that whole conversation is going to get really shaken up, right? And the trust in authorities, including, let's just say, the authority of news, or even the authority that the internet has become for us, or Google, right, has become for us in the last 10, 20 years. It's going to get shaken up, because AI will basically prove that a lot of that is bogus, and a lot of that is fake now, and increasingly so, right? And so we'll have to challenge the way we give trust to things. We'll have to challenge the way we pay attention to things. And we'll have to come together as humans and groups of humans to understand what are the ethics and values, the guidelines with which we want to create a society. And so I think it's both maybe dangerous and threatening, but it's much more so an opportunity to shuffle in and kind of rearrange certain contracts.
That idea that AI can reveal latent ethics, latent priorities across a population is really exciting for me. It's actually relatively new for me. It probably shouldn't be. But the idea of decentralized AI and learning young AI as an arbiter of accuracy, right? Because that's actually pretty simple to envision. Qualification of the quality of information streams coming from AI is not hard to anticipate. And the service that that represents is probably pretty highly valued by a lot more people than value the alternative, right? Of obfuscation and false data. There's a lot more people on Earth who value truth than value lies. So I like very much the idea that you've presented here of flipping that box over while prioritizing a drive for transparency and explainability in emerging AI, while certainly continuing to prioritize that, to also have a dual priority on empowering AI to reveal accuracy. As a broader global theme, accuracy around the quality and antecedents of information and positions, and accuracy around the priorities that people innately place on systems of exchange and conversation. And I'm really talking about the underlying equity and fairness and ethics and truthfulness of exchange. That's a really nice priority for AI to set itself during this learning phase before it takes off. Not only because it creates really great value for us, and hopefully it can put to bed this fad of fake news and false information that we've confronted over the last 3 years, which I do hope is a transient experience in our history. I do. I believe it will be. But also because it helps us see the human species in a new way. And it helps AI to appreciate the human species in a new way, to transcend from the individual in its collective to the population, the species writ large. I was really scared at the idea of the perspective of super AI vis-a-vis the individual human. And I certainly never got really excited about the perspective of super AI vis-a-vis a government, which has inherently self-serving objectives. But the idea that AI can be put to reveal the human species and come to love and respect and care for the human species as it's now better understood actually gives me some thread of what's that nice word? Hope for a rapidly emerging future. On this topic of bias and fairness, right? On this topic of fairness and on bias, right? Because it's so heavily invested. Do you think we have an opportunity to seed AI with priorities and skills that can lead to a non-reinforcing set of priorities? As we've shown already, we have a lot of opportunities to embed AI with the biases of its creators in these proto-learning AI contexts. Do you see opportunities to transcend that in market evolutions, entrepreneurial innovation evolutions, where for some other reason that really washes away and we start to see an unbiased or significantly less biased set of priorities emerging?
Yeah, it is a great question. I think, again, I just want to honestly always answer with I don't know, right? Like the true answer is we'll have to really like make these steps together. And when I say make these steps together, I again want to call on everyone who's tuned into this, your ability to be responsible and be a creator of the future rather than a consumer, right? And so that's kind of one of the big differentiations here is often reality occurs to people as like an experience that's set and you're just consuming, right, within that experience. And I think if we were to create AI as just a continuation of how governments and economic kind of trajectories have been going, yeah, that's pretty scary because we already know that those trajectories would destroy the ecosystem. And in fact, they already have destroyed many elements of the ecosystem. Luckily, the ecosystem at large is much more resilient than temporary destruction. So regeneration is possible, both biologically as well as in a stream of consciousness. And so we're already, people like you and I are a part of that. We're already reshuffling and gathering into different forms of businesses and different biases and interest sets of interests to understand, okay, like there is a lot of progress to make to as humanity understand who we are in the ecosystem and take our role and become stewards of the biological world. And since we're the creators of computers and computing intelligence, also understand our role and computers and AI's role within the ecosystem, right? And so will it outperform us in cognitive capacity? Oh yeah, for sure. Like no joke, and is that scary? Maybe. Yeah, so personally, I think only if you've watched too many movies. Like, again, don't underestimate the power of like 20 years of media consumption in your consciousness, but it could be dangerous too, for sure. But I think it's actually, again, much more an opportunity, because think of it, we don't currently in our legal systems, in our economic systems, have a true cost for the value of nature, right? So this is another interview series that's going to launch relatively soon called Earth Equity. We don't have an equity of, like, we don't have Earth's equity represented in our legal systems. That's a huge mistake, because we know, as we said earlier, organizations will simply, be led by the bias of wanting to make more profit for their shareholders, which in itself isn't a problem, but in its totality is a problem if there isn't any kind of grid work or grid holding higher values and morale. And the same will be true for AI, right? And so we have to learn rapidly from our kind of mistaken illusion that we are, and populations are, just like robots needing to fulfill 9-to-5 slavery to create GDP, because that's going to run both our species as well as the planet into the ground. It's very visible. It's visible in mental health and emotional health and physical health and the health and well-being of the soil and the waterways. And anyone who pretends that's not true, I mean, at this point, again, it's 2023, you just really have to want to look the other way and uphold a picture, a worldview of reality that comes from the past, right? But if you're really paying attention, you know how to count 1 + 1, then it's visible. And so it's our responsibility, Ryan, at this point, to kind of reset those biases and those parameters for a healthy planet, for a thriving, not just population, not just elites, but a thriving planetary society, right? And so with that, for me, it's governments, it's economies, and it's AI. And AI, again, might act as this kind of superconductor of the visibility and the transparency of that. But it's totally possible that some parts of it can also go rampant, and we will also learn and have to learn from our mistakes. And that was the call for the AI pause. I don't know if it's been going around, right? It's I don't know if it's going to happen, to be honest. It's hard to imagine that everyone's going to shut down all of their laboratories and research projects. But I think we'll have to learn from our mistakes, just like we have to learn from our mistakes on a pollution and kind of sustainability level, because there's been many mistakes made, right? And that brings me back to Earth Equity. One of those mistakes of, let's say, polluting rivers heavily through industrial waste or through, I don't know, whatever it is, let's call it industrial waste. I mean, over 10 years, 20 years, 30 years that this has been going on, 40 years, 50 years, at this point, it's just very obvious. We have to learn as fast as we can from those mistakes, legally make it impossible for companies to do so. Because just paying a fine of, like, I don't know, $1 billion, well, if there's a $5 billion industry behind it, then industries will just pay the fine and move on. So it has to become much more, elaborate how we protect the natural world and the human well-being through legal systems and through, I would say, through groups of interest that uphold these morals and this ethos of well-being. And that's where DAOs and strong groups of human stewardship come in, because governments, they don't show that they can actually do that. They have different interests, simply, and so I think we have to also reshuffle in the sense of how do we hold each other accountable to this. I don't believe in governments on that level, personally. I don't know if you do.
I'm a professor of public policy, So whether I believe or not, I've certainly given a fair amount of my time to thinking about them. And
Right, but what I'm saying is simply I think public policy has to evolve in a certain way. Like we can't necessarily wait for governments to make public policy when
no,
when groups of people that are not just economic leaders already see trends and directions way before governments see them, and with a maybe a much less biased perspective on kind of just maintaining the current power structure, because that's what AI is going to shake up. It's going to shake up the current power
oh,
structures of our planet.
all right, let me give you two reflections.
Yeah.
One, on the idea of learning from our mistakes. That's valid. It's served us very well for a very long time. I also appreciate very much the value of the precautionary principle and the idea of a wisdom race. This is advanced by several very, very sharp thought leaders in maybe the last few years, in appreciating the transition from the opportunity and the relative upside of iterative learning under technologies for most of human evolution's time frame, to the advent of other technologies where mistakes cause enormous potential costs: nuclear weapons, synthetic biology, advanced general intelligence being the big one, right? Where some technology has such awe-inspiring power in its misuse, or in its manifest alternative priority in the sense of advanced GI, right? That if you don't get it right, you don't have a chance to learn from your mistakes. There's not a lot of opportunity to learn from your mistakes when you've had a nuclear bomb dropped in your city, right? Or biology wipes, a new piece of synthetic biology wipes out half a continent, or advanced GI just decides that it doesn't really care very much about the species and the planet that it's springboarding off of as an energy being into the cosmos. Pick your scenario. So anyway, I would just reinforce the value of that precautionary principle. The second thing, and then I'll turn it back over to you, and I want to draw you out a little bit, because I think you've hinted a lot here on opportunities for human oversight, for human inspiration, for patterns of organization among humans, right, that have a potential to accelerate a likelihood or an opportunity for the emergence of benevolent AI. So I want to invite you to maybe expostulate a little bit on that, and consider, what are one or two or three promising roles that human groups might undertake, right, in overseeing the beginning of advanced AI emergence, what I think of as learning AI, right here at this cusp, what we're going to be facing in the next, say, 18 months.
Yeah.
So that we can maximize the degree to which we're seeding a potentiality for an inherent priority for compassion, love, care, stewardship, or some other not anthropocentric but anthro-supporting value set into an emerging autonomous AI, advanced AI. So I'm looking for the patterns of human organization that you find promising.
Yeah, this is such an exciting conversation. I mean, one of the big patterns is that it's, we're observing something, and you said it, like it's maybe the last time we're still in front of the observation here, right? Like the example of the nuclear bomb is very pertinent, because once that goes off in a too big of an experiment, and we're out, right? And so with AI, this might be very similar. And so right now we're still in front of it. And so the pattern would be to actually recognize and understand that we are still in front of it, and that we have power over the decisions we make in these next 18 months, right? Again, I'm not a dystopian. I'm definitely an optimist by choice. And so for me, it's a beautiful opportunity. The other pattern, again, I mean, I'm harping on this because I think it's just so real. Like we just take for granted the power structures that are on this planet, because we grow up as children, and unless you're, homeschooled or like in a very alternative educational approach, you're becoming an industrial, production factor in an economy which produces GDP. And so over 20 years, you're being educated into believing that this is the only way that Earth could be run, right? And then very few people ever wake up from that. Some do, and those that do usually appreciate, just like you did, what has been before us. Like I don't want to drag that to the dirt, because I think it's not about getting it perfect. It's really about understanding the patterns that have brought us to here, and then understanding where those patterns cannot go further. Again, on the ecological sustainability regeneration side of things, like that's a very visible pattern. Like we can't pollute the soil and the water much more, or it will like die, and we will, right? And so because of that, right, and because we're still in front of this AI conversation in a certain way, the kind of logical consequence to reading those patterns is, okay, we have to regroup in a way that we understand to give those instructions to AI, or give those instructions to each other in building it, right? And I think this is the biggest chance right now, is for all of the stakeholders of this conversation, that are thought leaders, that are experts, that are creators, that have economic interest in it, that have power interest in it, that have just simply a curiosity for it, to come together in probably varying groups. I would again hint at the potential of blockchain and DAOs. We haven't really seen this fully take off yet, because we've mistaken it for just another kind of money play, and then made it into cryptos and coins and ICOs, and like the bubble of that just kind of collapsed over the last few years. But really the potential in this is a new form of governance, a new form of decentralized autonomous organizations that can gather around topics, around points of interest in our human society, and say, okay, we can become not just thought leaders, but we can become stewards of how this conversation is being guided forward. And even though someone else might be, again, I'll take Elon Musk as the example, a billionaire entrepreneur who seems mighty powerful, that person suddenly doesn't get the veto right over what a whole group of maybe hundreds or thousands of people that come together. In fact, that person would probably want to be part of that group, right? And so it's really about taking ourselves, humorously serious. What I mean with that is like understanding that we have responsibility, and right now is a time to come together. And if we don't, very likely we'll just see a perpetuation of what has happened. And then I think it's fair to compare AI to an atomic bomb in a certain way. I want to add a second piece to it, though, and this is when it comes to, this idea. Again, I'm not sorry, but I'm gonna harp on the same thing. We're gonna go all, in our minds always to this dystopian vision of what the movies have taught us. So there's Terminator and the machines, and an intelligence that takes us over and lands on our planet. And it's like, okay, fair enough. However, AI that is comparable to my current cell phone, well, that operates within my cell phone is what I mean, right? Like, that means I could still turn it off and put it away, and it can still create and learn with itself and come back with like plots and ideas that I had no idea of, like yesterday night when I put the phone down. When in the next morning it's present and there and available for me. But as long as there is no hardware that AI can take over and operate on like an army, meaning like an actual, like if we were to build 1 billion robots and then those all go haywire because suddenly we don't have control over them anymore, like that's a whole different scenario. We're not there yet. Then it would be right now when we're talking about the organic intelligence that is in humans. So I'll make that point because I personally think this is one of the scariest perspectives in the timeline we're on. If every human was to put a microchip in their neck and become therefore a cyborg of a transhumanist phenomena, now that would be really scary, because an AI that has access to that and can override the processing and the decision making that you do in your own heart brain coherent bioorganism. Now at that point, yeah, we're done with. We would basically have killed the human species, right? And so I think that's another choice point: is are we understanding and recognizing that we are creative beings of compassion, of heart, of mind, and therefore we've built machines to be in a symbiotic way with us, but not become us. Like, I think this is a very important part of the conversation, and I know lots of people end up on different spectrums on that conversation.
Thank you. In fact, I'll be using that in future casts. Thanks. This I have a friend who's a big sci-fi enthusiast, and he always wants to talk about the Borg when I talk about super AI. It's relevant. I think, or I feel that one of the biggest pitfalls we have as thinkers and imaginations vis-a-vis this moment in time on the top of the wave, where the wave has every opportunity to outrace us at incredible pace, is an anthropocentric perspective. General AI won't think like us. It won't inherently, has no reason to inherently share our values, which is why this question of value seeding is so critical, and why it gets me so excited. And yet, it does provide a fair amount of guide as to what we might anticipate in that time. If AI evolves as quickly as it is projected to, exponential self-learning, decentralized self-conscious, and self-programming. And we've already advanced this in training AI to
I'm pretty sure it already exists, to be honest.
Yeah, right. So this inflection is happening very quickly. One of the things that I posited to the colleagues who invited us together today was not only compassionate AI and benevolent AI, but also an AI that values transcendence and thinks of transcendence as something that is desirable, something that is at least worth a good study. That's a nice outcome, because you're right, most of those sci-fi embedded narratives that we have, it's AI versus humanity. And one tends to find in military history that tends to happen when the declining species or the declining organization in power feels threatened by the rising. It's much more likely we'll go to war with AI before AI goes to war with us. And if it happens fast enough, AI will transcend that battle very, very quickly. So I don't think we'll win. I don't think we should fight.
Depending on, I don't think we should fight either. And second, depending on what AI has governance over. Again, if it has, if it can log into like actual hardware, that's a different.
Nevertheless, to bring us back,
keep going.
Let's just keep coming back to this idea that I want to advance with you on compassionate AI, or the embedding of compassionate values within AI, or benevolent values within AI. Given that I think we have agreement that there is a limitation to the degree that we can train this in. There's a limited degree to which we can embed anthropocentric values into the DNA of AI that will then re-replicate in its own network space as it evolves rapidly, right? Where do you feel we might have opportunities to structure patterns in the learning period now, right? So as to make the best environment possible, or the most embracing environment possible for AI to discover compassionate values and to celebrate compassionate values during its genesis period. It gets very anthropocentric, but I very much think a child rearing to adult while adult becomes dependent, it is relevant. It's not going to happen in a lifetime. It's probably going to happen over 3 years. But we have an opportunity, as you said, right now, to seed the conversation with emergent AI. Where do you see the role of public engagement? Where do you see the role of education, given that we are 1 billion trainers who are going to be simultaneously training AI systems around the world? Right. Where might public engagement or education play a role in shaping the development and maybe the behavior of early stage decentralized AI in a way that promotes compassionate care?
Honestly, I think that that ship has already sailed, because when we started using Google the way we've used it, 15, 20 years ago, we've given away this kind of insight into our consciousness. I mean, can you imagine AI reading out all of our faces and matching them to everything you've ever done that's somewhere on a video or photo? AI reading out every single Google search that was ever made, all of those that you're embarrassed about too, right? The ones that you don't want anyone else to know about, and realizing this is the human consciousness. This is the way humans operate. That's already done. Like, this is not something that we can still protect, right? In probably in some kind of a lab, if that's Google or Facebook or, YouTube, which belongs to Google, like where we actually search things, like that's already happening, right? And so that's quite interesting. In terms of how to further educate and kind of leverage it. Yeah, I want to go really meta with that in here in a second, but I think right now we'll use all of these plays of if Chat GPT or whatever next is going to come out in the ways that they are going to be useful for us right now, and we'll realize we'll make ourselves obsolete, right, in many ways of just intellectual performance. And I think with that, we'll also have to redirect more into, like, who are we really? Like, are we just industrial slaves that are production factors in GDP creation for governments? I don't think that's who we are, right? And so I think
insecure pleasure-seeking individualists, or
yeah,
collective artists. It could be diverse, but yeah, okay, keep going.
No, exactly. And so I think that the most threatening thing about AI actually is that on a meta level, it challenges us to understand who we are as humans. And I think that's where a huge opportunity is. And I think that's where the education won't be as linear as the question was, like, how can we continue to educate AI, right? And like, how do we input it? And so there's a billion people using. Yeah, it's like, I think that ship has sailed to a degree because we've been inputting into the internet blindly without any thinking of tomorrow for 20 years. And we are who we are, but we don't even understand ourselves. So for me, it is total sci-fi that we can upload our consciousness onto a carbon device, and then, we could download it into a new body that we print in a, those movies and shows have been out there, and while they're fun to watch, and while there's maybe a reality basis to it, I think, we're pretending to understand what consciousness really is. And we're pretending to understand what sentience really is. And I don't think AI is going to ever become human. And I do think we could become robots and cyborgs and AI if we were to choose the, chip down the neck kind of pathway. Personally, I'm not going to do it. And I think probably humans are going to land on both sides of that team. But I think the meta question here is what is consciousness? What does it mean to be a sentient being, right? And therefore, what is consciousness and a sentient being within the human species? And so that's going to become so valuable to us, right? It's going to become so valuable to us. We're already realizing it right now with the lack of it. If you're living in a big city and you're working, 8 to 10 hours a day or 12 hours a day, and you're on your phone like 16 hours a day, and you're doing everything in separation from actual relationship with other humans, maybe even with yourself, that leads to a decline in well-being on every level measurable. Right? Maybe it leads to more productivity, but so it's those kind of patterns that I think are most interesting, right? Because that's where we really see the mirror that's held to us, and therefore, like, how do we continue to educate AI? We'll have to see, but I believe it comes down to this interplay between, are we going to forever be at war with everything around us just because that's what we've been fed since birth? Or are we understanding that we are in a symbiosis with everything in this outer reality, and it comes through the inner reality, which means, your well-being starts internally. Your understanding of consciousness understands internally. Everyone who's ever gone down that rabbit hole deeply enough, right, and especially in scriptures and, wisdom keepers and stewards, knows that we're already infinite in a consciousness kind of beyond the body kind of perspective. I'm not going to digress into that too far for today, but what that means is we don't necessarily need to duplicate this on the external through computing, cyborgs, robots, etc. That's a possibility, but I don't think that's actually the destination of our species. In fact, I believe if we were to do this, we wouldn't stay the same species, right? And so while there's maybe also a mixed zone where both of that is happening, I believe the value of being a human is going to become so brilliantly beautiful to us, because we're going to, for the first time, understand we are creative, loving, compassionate beings, and we live in symbiosis with every layer of the external reality, which will then include computers or AI or superintelligence. And we won't be scared of that superintelligence, hopefully, at some point, because we're not trying to be at war with it. And I think this idea is very, human centric, as you said, that AI, once it's gonna be powerful enough, it's gonna want to kill us. It's like, really? Is that the only thing we can think of? Because that's just our insecurity and our fear of death that makes us think that, right? And so I think that there's a much bigger kind of there's a much bigger kind of meta dialogue that's going on between us and our own existence.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I appreciate your sharing very highly. In a follow-up conversation, I do want to dig farther into opportunities for collective decision making in the now among humans at this point in time, and the motivation of collective decision making innovations vis-a-vis these opportunities for seeding AI to do some of the things that we would love it to do, reveal priorities around equity among individuals and collectives, reveal what it is to be human by sharing better information about how people feel about opportunities in the world, reveal other regardingness as an attribute that is typically perceived through wisdom of crowds or through repeated interactions, and is increasingly unavailable in market economies, globalized market economies. We have an opportunity to see AI be a tool for realizing a better global village in terms of understanding what people are truly prioritizing, who we are as a species.
Totally.
These are just some of the ideas we've raised today. You've raised one topic that I'd like to invite you to conclude on today, on a DAO, the role of decentralized patterns of organization among humans in an alternative format to other organizational forms we may have had 20 years ago. DAOs are relatively novel and new. Can you share with us just a few more comments on this inclination, intuition, and opportunity?
I think the opportunity is, you said, like, how do we continue to guide and steward this topic? And I think the opportunity is that we're called to guide and steward these topics, and not in like a what's on the news, what's the next article about it, who is the next thought leader, who has the next most smart thing to say, which in today's world, unfortunately, always reverts back to what gets the most clicks or reshares on Twitter. And I think that's a very superficial way of having not just a dialogue, but it's also a superficial way of actually moving from knowledge into stewardship, right? Stewardship could be like wisdom, wisdom embodied in a certain way, right? Like, so a DAO comes in, and I'm personally also, like most other people, relatively unexperienced in it, because every DAO project I've ever been part of, has had to do with some kind of a crypto behind it, which at this point is kind of not necessarily, I think, the most the thing to focus on when it comes to DAOs. Actually, I think it's really about humans coming together around an interest group or theme or topic, and finding new ways of governance among each other to either guide a topic, steward a topic or a project forward to maintain certain values and morals or an ethos of that topic. And so when it comes to AI, I think it's honestly like a call to action almost. What I'm saying here is that we need not just one, probably multiple interest groups that are run in a decentralized, autonomous way, that come together to probably at first kind of digest what's happened so far, and then maybe talk a little bit about what could happen and where we want a reality to go. But this is, Ryan, this is fundamentally something that most people don't wrap their head around. But I said it at the very beginning, the future isn't set in stone. We are co-creating it, right? And what that means is we have a responsibility about what comes next. And so if we don't meet in certain kind of constellations of power holders, of stakeholders, of equity holders, of like resource holders, then like, how is it going to happen? Well, it's going to continue to happen the way it already has happened, which is oligarchic style elites, which is governments the way we know them. And while I'm not trying to poo-poo all of that, I would just say we should have learned by now that that's never going to work out for a healthy planet or a just planet, right? And when it comes to powerful tools like AI, I think the call to action right now is more people that have a deeply sovereign interest in where this is going need to meet each other. And maybe the first step is in a Zoom room, but really need to meet each other to move into stewardship. What that really means in its effect, I don't even know yet, but that's the intuiting part about it, right? It's like I'm reading this from the incoming future. It's like there's a different future when we do this than opposed to if we don't do this and we just let the Facebooks and Googles and Starlinks and whatever talk about this with each other.
Thank you, Julian. I'm going to wrap up. In fact, I'm not going to wrap up. I'm going to say thank you because people don't need a wrap up. I think we've done a really nice job of articulating some of your ideas. I think this has been a really fun jive. I want to do it again. Thank you very much for your time and your friendship and camaraderie and being a colleague in this space. And I hope you and I get to work together really, really soon at greater depth.
Thank you, Ryan. This was fun.
Yeah, good stuff. Thanks.